And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is probably one of the most colorful of all the presidents we've had in this country. He definitely was a new breath of fresh air for some people in America at the time because of his ruggedness, frontiersy, very down to earth, man of the people kind of feeling and approach to things. So anyway, let's begin. All right, so in the election of 1824, you got John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, William Crawford, and Andrew Jackson, and they're all just running, right? And they're all in the same party. So they're running for office and they're all in the same party because everybody wants to be in the Democratic Republican Party because the Federalists are pretty much their power is waned so much that they're not really an entity anymore. So the really interesting thing is that Jackson, he's going to win the popular vote. So you can look over here if you want and see Jackson with the popular vote, he wins. However, since there were four candidates that were seeking election from the same party, then the votes were split. And what you had to have is you had to have a majority of the electoral college votes. So Andrew Jackson, he wins the most electoral votes as well, but he doesn't win the majority, if you will. Does that make sense? So there's this problem. And so what what Henry Clay decided, who got the least votes, he's the guy in the orange looking, okay? He went to the representatives because the House representatives have to choose at that point. That's what the Constitution says if there's no majority, if you will. So uh, so Henry Clay goes to the House of Representatives and tells the House representatives that represent him, "Hey, will you throw your support behind John Quincy Adams?" And that's what they did. And as a result, John Quincy Adams made him his vice president. And that did not go over well with I'm sorry, not vice president, secretary of state. But anyway, that did not go over well with Andrew Jackson. He thought that there was a lot of shenanigans going on, and he called it corrupt bargaining. And that had a really bitter taste in the mouths of many Americans as well. They did not appreciate how that all went down. So anyway, John Quincy Adams, he's going to be president, and he's going to try to get a lot of things done. He's going to try to, work on the infrastructures like roads and bridges and just the internal improvements happening. Jacksonians saw these measures as a waste of money and a violation of the Constitution. Congress also patched together a new tariff law, which generally satisfied northern manufacturers but alienated southern planters. So Southerners started denouncing these tariffs as the tariff of abominations. Um, and so John Quincy Adams not doing so well because he's a Democratic Republican, right? And so you get most of your support from the South and from the West. So he's doing things that are helping the people in the North more than the South. So that's not going to go so well for John Quincy. So we had the Revolution of 1828 that happens. Now it's Andrew versus, for re-election, Andrew Jackson versus John Quincy Adams, and it gets pretty brutal. Okay, so another name for Jackson is Old Hickory, and his followers were called Jacksonians. So they're gonna get pretty personal. Sadly, they're gonna start attacking each other's wives. And so Adam's wife is going to be, accused of, being born out of wedlock, and then and then Jackson's wife is going to be brought into the mud as well. And anyway, so it's called mudslinging, this tactic, and this is kind of the first time that we see some serious. I mean, attacking each other's fine, but when you start going after the family, then that's just kind. I mean, you're not even really sticking to the policies at that point, right? You're attacking character rather than the policies that the people support. So it doesn't go over well, but it is pretty interesting, and the gossip was pretty juicy, right? So had a lot of high interest in this one, in which Adams will not win, and then Jackson will succeed quite handily, actually, and people like him. I mean, he's this war hero. He's this man of the Western frontier. Like, he's very attractive as far as the gruffiness that you probably want in a president at that time period. So some of the things that really made Adams stand out here, he's a strong leader. He's a symbol of the working class. He fought, many Indians in battle. He was a hero of the Battle of New Orleans. He had a mansion in Tennessee as a wealthy planter and slave owner. Um, he never lost the rough manners of the frontier. So, even though he was this, cultured, high in politics kind of guy, he still chewed tobacco. He fought several duels. He displayed a violent temper, which I don't know. I don't think that is quite a plus. But anyway, um, he wasn't even educated, and the last person who was like that. I mean, I think Jackson was going for more of a Washington-esque um, persona because here's a guy that's not educated. He was also a military hero. He was also a plantation owner, yet he was still kind of gruffy and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Those are all very Washington-esque type things. So anyway, so while he's president, he's a frugal president. He's more for state rights than he is for federalism for the most part, but there are some contradictions to that. Jackson vetoed 12 bills um, that the Congress tried to pass. So he vetoed more bills than all the past presidents before him. So he and Congress had a bit of a power struggle going on, right? Um, anyway, so Jackson, he had a cabinet, but then he also had really close friends that kind of looked like they were influencing him sometimes more than the cabinet were. Cabinet would be like the Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Secretary of, Agriculture, etc. The district attorney, things like that, right? So he had all these closer friends though, and people called it his kitchen cabinet. So he had his cabinet members who were the officials, right? But then he had his kitchen cabinet. One situation that happened was the Peggy Eaton affair, and basically, so here's the wife of his Secretary of War. Her name is Peggy Eaton, and there was gossip going on. The other cabinet members that she basically she and her now husband got married before she was officially divorced from her husband, and so there was a lot of talk going on, and it really caused a lot of dissension happening within his cabinet. He tried to get the women of the husbands in the cabinet to play nice with each other, and his approach, I guess, wasn't so soft. He was probably very insistent, and as a result, he had people in his cabinet who just resigned. Um, and then a year later, you have John C. Calhoun, who's his vice president, also resign. So anyway, so things are kind of falling apart in Jackson's, at least his administration. It is Martin Van Buren will become his new vice president when he runs for reelection. So you also have the Indian Removal Act that happened. The Indian Removal Act is again, so as the settlers keep fanning out, even on the East Coast, they're seeking to kind of flex their elbows, and so unfortunately, you have the Cherokee Nation who kind of gets caught in the crossfire here. So when the Cherokee challenged Georgia in the courts for trying to like kick them off their land, the Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee v. Georgia, this is the ruling, that the Cherokees were not a foreign nation with the right to sue in a federal court. So here you have the Cherokee saying, no, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. And then the courts rule, well, you don't have the right to sue us. So, anyway, however, there was a second case in Worcester v. Georgia. Now, the High Court is going to rule that the laws of Georgia had no force within the Cherokee territory. So now they're going to say, look, Cherokee land is doesn't need to abide by the state of Georgia, right? So in this clash between state laws and the federal courts, you have Jackson who's going to side with the states. The court was powerless to enforce this decision without Jackson's support. In 1838, after Jackson had left office, the U.S. Army forced 15,000 Cherokee to leave Georgia. The hardships of the Trail of Tears westward caused the death of 4,000 Cherokee. So that's sort of the precursor to the Trail of Tears. Another issue that was going on was this idea of nullification. So again, Jackson favored state rights. However, he didn't want to break up the Union to that degree, right? He didn't favor. He wanted things to stay united. However, we have South Carolina, and the legislature is going to declare that the increased tariff of 1828, also known as the Tariff of Abominations, is unconstitutional. Therefore, we don't have to follow it. So now you have the state government who's saying, no, 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 we've just ruled this federal law unconstitutional, so we're not going to follow it. So now there's this thing of, well, which one gets to succeed, supersede the other, right? So John C. Calhoun turned to Andrews and said, "Look, we got the nullification theory happening here, meaning that each state, if this goes on, if we allow South Carolina to say federal government, we don't accept these tariffs of abomination, and we just used our process of constitutional right to say it's unconstitutional, we're not going to follow it, right?" So the nullification theory is, well, if one state does that, then what's going to stop other states from doing that, which then leads to chaos, right? So the Webster-Hayne debate goes on. What Robert Hayne argued for state rights. Daniel Webster attacked the idea that any state could defy or leave the Union. Calhoun's South Carolina increased tensions by holding a special convention to nullify both the hated 1828 tariffs of abomination and the tariffs of 1832. Jackson reacted by issuing a proclamation to the people of South Carolina stating that nullification and disunion were treason, and then he sent the military after them. So Jackson wasn't going to have any dissent of states. So he was going to make sure that didn't happen. So Jackson shared the Southerners' alarm about the growing anti slavery movement in the North. He used his executive power to stop the anti slavery literature from being sent through the U.S. mail. So I need you to understand here's a U.S. president who uses his power to stop any anti slavery literature from going to other people and sharing a message. The freedom of speech, if you will, right? So that did not sit very well at all. You also have Jackson, and there again. There's this whole idea of the Bank of the United States, right? There's a charter, but that charter is only for a few years, and they have to recharter. So the bank president, Nicholas Biddle, he managed it effectively, but he was an arrogant kind of guy, and people were kind of suspicious of the kind of power the bank was wielding. Jackson believed the Bank of the United States was unconstitutional. Shocker, he is a Democratic Republican, right? He's not a Federalist. Um, Jackson's promptly vetoed the bank's recharter bill, denouncing that the bank is a private monopoly that enriched the wealthy and foreigners at the expense of the common people. So here's a piece of propaganda, if you will, with Jackson, and they put him in the crown and made it sound like he's a king and a dictator and all that, right? So you have a two-party system emerging once again. The Federalist Party is out, and the Whigs kind of take the place of the Federalist Party to a degree, right? So you have the supporters of Jackson. Now they're known as Democrats, and you have the supporters of his rival Henry Clay, and they're going to be called the Whigs. Remember, Henry Clay was at one point his Secretary of State. So we have a Democratic Party who hark back to the old Democratic Republican Party of Jefferson, and the Whig Party is going to resemble more the defunct Federalist Party of Hamilton. Just as the Federalists have supported National Bank and a national road in order to promote economic growth, the Whigs supported spending several money for internal improvements such as roads, canals, harbors. Um, and then you have some major issues happening because he's not chartering this bank. So so funds were withdrawn to charter the bank. They were given to state banks in essence to sort of counter the state the Bank of the United States. And all these state banks that received this money, they were called pet banks. So Jackson's financial policies and land speculations that many investors were doing in the West, it's going to cause prices and land to inflate. And inflation is not a good place to be. To hopefully prevent this, Jackson's going to issue a presidential order known as the Specie Circular. So that's going to require all federal lands to be purchased with gold or silver and with no paper banknotes. So they're kind of doing something from the Ming Dynasty, right? When the Ming Dynasty hit hyperinflation, if you remember from WAP, maybe you don't or you didn't take WAP, but they stopped using paper money and just accepted silver. So here we have Jackson who's kind of thinking maybe we'll do the same thing. We'll just accept, silver, gold, hard currency and kind of do away with the banknotes. However, that didn't go so well for him. The banknotes lost their value really quickly and then land sales just plummeted. Right after Jackson left office, a financial crisis known as the Panic of 1837 plunged the nation's economy into a depression. So now we have an election happening. Jackson persuaded the Democratic Party to nominate his loyal Vice President Martin Van Buren. Here's Van Buren right here, and he was a practical politician. Um, Fearing defeat, the Whig Party adopted the unusual strategy of nominating three candidates from three different regions. So the Whigs hoped to throw the election into the House of Representatives, kind of like with John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, etc., right? With Jackson. Um, the Whigs' plan failed because Van Buren he took 58% of the electoral votes anyway. So the Whigs lost their first official election, if you will, as the Whig Party. However, things don't go so well for Van Buren. The economy is not very good. The country is in a depression state, and so people are gonna scream loudly about Van Buren's tactics, the ideas of laissez-faire economics, is going to get a really bad connotation to it, and so that's going to lead to the campaign of 1840. And Van Buren is like a wounded animal. Okay, so we're gonna have this now. The Whigs are pretty dead set on winning this, without a doubt. So they're gonna run William Henry Harrison, who's a war hero. I mean, if it worked for Andrews, right? Andrew Jackson, um, being a war hero and all, maybe this would be their way. So you have the war hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe, and he's also a Whig. Now, in this, we're going to see some unprecedented things happening. Um, Usually, you have like parades and debates and things like that. Here, they're really going to try to hit home that Harrison is very down to earth. So they're going to actually like get log cabins and put them on wheels and like have parades through towns. Showing that this is his symbol. He's a down to earth kind of guy, right? And then they're gonna have like hard cider be alcoholic cider, for the voters to drink and buttons to wear, and it's gonna be almost be like a party. And it's so cool. The Whigs are awesome. They're the hippiest, kind of things, the cloudiest, if you will, right? So you have you have Martin Van, and then they're gonna label Martin Van Buren as Martin Van Ruin, because of what he did to the economy, and he was an effective president. Is how they're gonna go about it. So anyway, the Whigs are gonna win, and that's gonna mean Harrison is now gonna be president. However, Harrison is gonna die less than a month from pneumonia, um, after taking office, and so it's a tragic thing. You have a president of the United States, and he's gonna die less than a month in from a pretty serious disease that could get many people, right? So John Tyler is going to become the first vice president who's going to succeed to presidency. from being vice president without an election, right? As the Constitution allows. So Tyler, he wasn't much of a Whig. He vetoed the Whigs' national bank bills and other legislations and favored Southern and expansionists and Democrats and during the balance of his term. So the Whigs get their president, and then he dies less than a month later, and then the vice president pretty much fights against the core of the Whigs' policies. So yeah, it's kind of comical for the Whigs who've been trying to get power now for 2 terms. But anyway, so go ahead and write your summary, and we'll discuss this when we get back. Thank you.